Hello, this is Dr. Davis, and I'll be going through the PowerPoint for uh, the lecture on tissue types, Chapter 9 for Anatomy and Physiology 240. All right, let's get started. All right. Okay, so here's the learning objectives. First, we're going to list and discuss the important structural and functional generalizations that apply to epithelium as a principal tissue type. Then we're going to classify membranous epithelium using the shell shape and cell layers as the criterion. We're going to discuss each type in terms of structure, function, and location in the body. Then we're going to discuss glandular epithelium, compare endocrine, exocrine glands in terms of generalized function. Then we're going to discuss the structural classification of exocrine glands and explain how actually this portion, the apocrine, holocrine, merocrine glands, and they differ. We're not actually going to go through that in this lecture. Then we're going to discuss the functions of connective tissue and the major types of connective tissue, fibers, cells, and matrix in terms of structural function. Then we're going to list the major types of connective tissue and identify their important structural and functional differences. So let's start with epithelial tissue. Now there's two types of epithelial tissue, membranous and glandular. And the difference is with membranous epithelium, that covers the body and some of its parts, and then it lines the serous cavities. Serous cavities are like the pleural cavity, pericardial cavity, and peritoneal cavity. It also covers the blood and lymphatic vessels, and it lines the respiratory, digestive, and genital urinary tracts. The membranous epithelium is also called surface epithelium. So the glandular epithelium is grouped in solid cords or hollow follicles and tubes that form the secretory units of endocrine and exocrine glands. So as the name says, glandular, it deals with the tissue that's in glands. Okay, the functions of epithelial tissues, they're for protection, sensory functions, secretion, absorption, and excretion. Okay, let's look at some generalizations. Okay, the limited amount of matrix material. When we talk about matrix, we talk about the extracellular matrix. That's the substance outside of a cell. The membranous type, they're attached to a basement membrane. So that's the first one that we're going to talk about. The first type of epithelial tissue are membranous, and they are attached to a basement membrane. They are also avascular. The cells are in close proximity, real close to each other, and it has many desmosomes and tight junctions. There are areas of connection between each cell, and also they're capable of reproduction. Okay, and then epithelial cells have a characteristic we call polarity, which means they have two opposite faces. It has the part that's near the basement membrane, and then the part that is up near the top, the apical part. That's considered polarity. And then also epithelial tissues, they don't contain any blood vessels, so their epithelium is said to be avascular, or without vessels. Okay. So then we talk about this is how we classify the membranous epithelium. The classification is based on the cell shape. And so you have squamous cells, cuboidal cells, columnar cells, and pseudostratified cells. So squamous cells are flat and they're like plate-like. They're like eggs that are flattened out. And then cuboidal cells are cube-shaped, so they're as wide as they are tall. And columnar cells have more height than width. They appear narrow, real cylindrical. The pseudostratified columnar epithelium it's only one layer, so each cell touches the basement membrane, but they have oddly shaped columnar cells. So they're taller than they are wide, but they're oddly shaped, and some of them don't even reach the upper surface, but they touch the basement membrane. So with them touching the basement membrane, they are considered just one layer. And here's a picture of the different types of epithelium, and you could look and take your time looking at these with the squamous, cuboidal, columnar. And then when it's simple, it's just one layer. All the cells touch the basement membrane. When it's stratified, it means it has multiple layers. And so the squamous, this is multilayer for squamous, and cuboidal. And even though we have multilayer for columnar, it's very, very rare. They don't have it listed here. This is that pseudostratified. They're columnar cells, so they're taller than they're wide, but some of them are shorter than others. And some of them are, you know, thin on one end, and their nuclei are at different levels, so it looks like they're stacked. But if you look at this, all the cells touch the basement membrane. And so it's actually a single layer. And that's why they call it pseudostratified columnar, because they look like they're stratified or they're stacked on each other, but they're actually not. And so there's some modifications in columnar tissue. Ciliated, which means it has cilia at the top. Cilia will help with movement, and some of them may actually have microvilli that helps with absorption. So they might have microvilli on the end. And some of them may have goblet cells. Goblet cells are modified structure of the columnar cell that produces mucus. Okay. And so all right. So let's look at stratified. Stratified is multiple layers. So let's look at stratified columnar epithelium. It has multiple layers of columnar cells. This wasn't shown on the picture because it's very rare. Only the most superficial cells are obviously columnar. It's very rare, located in segments of the male urethra and near the anus. Then we had transitional epithelium. And transitional epithelium helps protect organ walls from tearing. And it's stratified, often 10 or more layers thick. Let's go back. And this is the transitional. So transitional, when it's relaxed, has all these layers of cells. And then when it's stretched, they all stretch out and it doesn't tear. And so it's just a whole lot of cells stacked on each other. So they're not squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. This is a special type, which is transitional. It's just a whole lot of cells clumped in together so that when it stretches, they actually don't tear. So you see this transitional type in urinary bladder. Let's see, so, okay, then we'll go to simple squamous epithelium, one cell layer of flat cells. And this is permeable to many substances. So in areas that you need a lot of permeability, you'll see simple squamous epithelium. When I say permeable, that means that things can go across it very easily. So you'll see this in respiratory tract, because you need oxygen and carbon dioxide to go through the lungs to get into the blood, or from the blood to get into the lungs. And so those cells are simple squamous epithelium. Then we have simple cuboidal epithelium. And simple cuboidal are one cell layer of cube-shaped cells, and they're found in many glands and ducts. And here's a picture of the simple squamous epithelium. This is an alveoli. And so these are the cells, simple squamous. See how they squish down? And so substances can pass through them very easily. Okay. Actually, I'm sorry, this is not alveoli, this is the glomerulus. So this is glomeruli. So this is in the kidney, but it's still, once again, substances need to pass through this to go from the glomerulus into the kidneys. And so it needs to be able to filter the fluid from the blood and substances from the blood. So anywhere that you need substances to pass through, you'll have simple epithelium. Okay, with this one, here's the alveoli. This is the alveoli. This is air inside the lung. And so this one cell is part of the lining of this alveoli. And so oxygen will come in, and it will go through to come out into the blood. All right, and so this is kidney again, but these are tubules in the kidney. So this is a tubule in the kidney, and so things will be passing through here. And these are cuboidal, simple cuboidal cells. And so this is the basement membrane that goes around, and so these are cuboidal cells. Okay, and this is the lumen or opening of the tubule. And so these simple cuboidal cells line the lumen. So if it was going to secrete anything, it would secrete it directly into the lumen. Okay, then we talk about simple columnar cells. So it's single layer of tall column-shaped cells. The cells are often modified for certain functions, such as goblet cells, which goblet cells secrete mucus, so that's for secretion. You have cilia that are used for movement. And it's not movement of the cell itself, but movement of things across the cell. And then you have microvilli that will help in absorption. And so simple columnar cells, they often line the hollow visceral organs, or the hollow organs in the abdominal cavity. And so the pseudostratified columnar, they're columnar cells, but they have different heights. So they're taller than they are wide, but they have different heights. All of the cells rest on the basement membrane, but they may not reach the free surface above. And so the cell nuclei are odd and they're at irregular levels, so it makes it look like they're stratified. And so this type of epithelium lines the air passages and then some segments of the male reproductive system. So you have cilia that move, or motile cilia, and then they have mucus, which are important modifications. So what happens is, in the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, you have what we call goblet cells. So, and let's see, I think we have a picture of it. Yeah, we have goblet cells. This is the columnar epithelium. And then this is a goblet cell. It's a modified columnar cell that produces a lot of mucus. You see the mucus will be transported into the surrounding area outside of the cell. And so they have large secretory vesicles that give them an appearance of goblets. And then cilia are sensory organs of a cell that detect changes, such as the presence of certain chemicals that are outside the cell, and now the cell can detect them. And so in the intestines, for example, the plasma membranes of many columnar cells extend out in hundreds and hundreds of microscopic finger-like projections, which are called microvilli. And so if you look at this columnar cell, this one here has cilia that move things along, but you can also have microvilli, which are a lot of smaller extensions to increase absorption. Okay. And then, once again, this is pseudostratified columnar. This is columnar. Here's the cilia, better picture of the cilia. And the goblet cells that are producing mucus. And the basement membrane is down here. Remember we said the basement membrane? The membranous epithelium, they all have basement membrane. And so all these cells touch the basement membrane. So it's actually a simple epithelium. But since it looks like it's stacked, you see the nuclei up here, nuclei down here of different cells, looks like they're stacked, but they're not. Every one of these cells touch the basement membrane. So it's pseudostratified columnar. And they have the modified cells. Some of them have goblets, and they have the cilia. Okay. And of course, this is in the respiratory system. And now let's look at the stratified epithelium. With the stratified cuboidal epithelium, two or more rows or layers of cells that are typical in the stratified cuboidal. The basement membrane is indistinct, which means that every cell doesn't touch the basement membrane. This type of cell is located in sweat glands, sweat gland ducts, and in the pharynx. And the stratified cuboidal serves a protective function as well. Okay, so here we have keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. You have multiple layers of flat squamous cells, and the cells are filled with keratin at the top. These are dead cells. They're filled with keratin. It covers the outer skin on the body surface. And so this is a photomicrograph of thick skin. And so it shows cells, they become progressively flattened. They become more and more flattened, and they, as they approach the surface, and then they die off, and then they get sloughed off. So the outer layer is keratinized, and then at a certain point, they lose their nuclei as they get further up, and that's why they die. Remember we said that the membranous epithelial cells have a basement membrane. So the basement membrane goes here, and we said that this tissue is avascular. So it means it doesn't have any blood vessels that run through this. So it has to get all its nutrients and everything from the layer underneath it. So this is the dermis, and this dermis has blood vessels that go through here. So it provides nutrients across the basement membrane and go in and supply the cells. And so these stratified squamous cells, these that are closest to the basement membrane, are most active because they're getting nutrients and they're getting rid of waste. But the further up you go, the less active they are, to the place where they lose their nuclei and they die. And then when it gets up to the upper layer, they can have cells filled with keratin, and you get a keratinized layer, which is tough, and it helps to protect the underlying layers. Okay, and then we can have a non-keratinized layer. And so in this one, you don't have any flaking off of the cells when you get near the surface, but it has multiple layers. Once again, you have the basement layer, and you see the first layer of cells is called the basal cells, basal layer. But then you have the basement membrane that's at the bottom, and then you have a whole lot of layers of stratified squamous cells. These type of cells is what you see in lining the vagina and the mouth and esophagus. This free surface is usually moist. And the primary function for this is that it's for protection with this multiple layers. And then we have transitional epithelium. This is where we talked about we had the multiple layers and the cells are all kind of packed in together, different shapes and different types of tissue, cells. And then when they're relaxed, they all come together, but with transitional, when it gets stretched, these actually don't tear. And so, so it's stratified because not all of the cells touch the basement membrane. Okay, so you can look at table 9.2 in the textbook. It summarizes the major types of epithelium. Okay, so that's the membranous epithelium. And so now let's talk about the glandular epithelium. Now, glandular epithelium is specialized for secretory activity, so for secreting things. And then we have exocrine glands, discharge secretions directly into ducts. Now, I need you to know the difference between exocrine and endocrine glands. Remember that exocrine glands, they discharge secretions into ducts. Endocrine glands, they are ductless. They discharge their secretions directly into the blood or into some type of interstitial fluid. But just think about it as discharge secretions directly into the blood. Now, what's important about that is that if you have an exocrine gland that discharges secretions into ducts, then it means it's going to take it directly to where it needs to have its action. If you have endocrine glands that secrete their discharges directly into the blood, then that means where it's going to have action could be anywhere that blood goes. So that's how you can kind of determine if something's endocrine or exocrine gland by looking and see where it's having its action. If you know, like you say, the glands that produce hydrochloric acid in the stomach, well, you don't want hydrochloric acid secreted into the blood, so you know that that must be an exocrine gland. It has a duct, takes it directly to the stomach, that's where the action is going to happen. And if you look at the testes, secrete testosterone. And so they are a gland that secrete testosterone. And if you said, well, what type of gland are they, endocrine or exocrine? Well, where does testosterone act? Testosterone acts and, you know, strengthens the muscles and increases hair production and causes guys to think differently. And so if you look at it, you say, wow, well, it acts just about anywhere in the body. Yeah, that's because testosterone is secreted directly into the blood. And so the testes are an endocrine gland. Okay. I'm not going to go into, you don't have to worry about this, the shaping, the classification of the exocrine glands. Okay. And so this picture just shows the exocrine glands in the stomach. So these glands produce gastric juices, like it's a mixture of water, mucus, enzymes, acids, and other substances. And then this talks about apocrine glands. I'm not going to go, you know, have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about apocrine, holocrine, and merocrine glands. And so, but for your just knowledge, it's fairly straightforward. Apocrine glands are cells that whatever they produce and they pinch off, it's produced here, then it pinch off the plasma membrane, and then it floats, goes into the duct or whatever duct that it's going to be produced in, and that's how it produces its substance. The holocrine glands, they actually it produces whatever substance, and then it buds off, and it explodes, or what they call lysis. And so it's basically sacrifices, the cell will sacrifice as it's releasing its secretion. And these are Wernicke glands. They produce the substance and they just release it into the duct. Remember these different types of exocrine glands. Exocrine glands, they have ducts, so it secretes directly into the duct. Okay. Now that's the epithelial tissue. Now let's talk about connective tissues. Connective tissues, general functions, they connect, they support, they transport, and they protect. So the general structure that for connective tissues, the extracellular matrix predominates in most connective tissues and determines their physical characteristics. What that means is it has a lot of extracellular matrix. With connective tissue, most of the tissue is made up of extracellular matrix, that substances outside of the cell. So you have cells, and then you have substance outside the cell. Well, in connective tissue, most of connective tissue is made up of substances outside of the cells. So the extracellular matrix consists of fluid, gel, and solid matrix, and then that's what determines the physical characteristic of that particular connective tissue. So like some connective tissues can have a soft gel consistency. Some are firm, but they're still flexible. Some are hard and rigid. Some are tough. And then some are delicate. And you can actually have extracellular matrix that is actually fluid as well. Okay. All right. So here's the four main types of connective tissue. Four main types. I definitely need you to know these four main types. First, you have fibrous, which is connective tissue proper, so that's fibrous. Then you'll have bone, then you have cartilage, and you have blood. Those are the four main types: fibrous, bone, cartilage, and blood. And so in fibrous, there's different types. I'm not going to go through the different types, other than you need to know that adipose tissue is a fibrous connective tissue, and also tendons and ligaments are fibrous connective tissue. And we'll go through that a little bit in just a few minutes. So then with bone is a second type of connective tissue. It's considered a separate category of connective tissue because it has fibers and a hard mineralized extracellular matrix. Remember I said the extracellular matrix in connective tissue determine its consistency. And so bone has a hard mineralized extracellular matrix, so it's and so that's why it has a different category than the fibers. Then we have cartilage, has another category because it also has fibers that actually, in the extracellular matrix, that actually traps water as well. And so they don't get as, they're not as hard as bone. And so, but it traps water, and so it forms a firm gel. And then blood is also a connective tissue, and it's characterized by the lack of fibers in its extracellular matrix. And with lack of fibers, it's just all fluid. And so blood is a tissue, it's a connective tissue that is all fluid because it doesn't have the fibers making the tissue hard, keeps it fluid. So then, let's see, with loose fibrous, they have different types of fibrous connective tissue. They have loose fibrous. I'm not going to have you go through the different types of fibrous connective. Just know that fibrous connective is a type of connective tissue. And also, there's another fibrous connective tissue is adipose. I do need you to know adipose. And then so adipose tissue contains mostly fat cells. And then the functions of adipose tissue. And adipose tissue acts as food reserve and acts for support, protection, insulation, and heat generation. Okay. So each adipocyte, or the fat cell, typically has one large vesicle filled with stored fat. And this fat gets so large that it pushes the cytoplasm of the cell outward against the plasma membrane. As it stores more and more fat, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the adipocytes, or the fat cells, fill up the cell completely. And here's a picture of it. This is adipose tissue. And so the large storage spaces for fat, it just pushes everything to the side. And here's a nucleus of the cell. This is a cell, but it just pretty much is all filled with fat. Okay. And so I think it's good to know how fat is distributed in males and females. And you can see with males, it's mostly in the stomach and the front portion of the thigh, in the buttocks, and down the thigh. With females, it has not as much in the stomach, more in the thighs, and as you can see, it goes to the side of the thigh and more in the buttocks region. And also underneath the arms, typically women will have more fat underneath the arms, and of course you have fat in the breasts. Okay, I'm not going to have you go over responsible for reticular tissue. And so you can read through. And then once again, we're not going to go through the different types of fibrous tissue. Just know that you have fibrous tissue is one of the 4 types of tissue. And you know, adipose. And then we look at it. Tendons and ligaments are one of the fibrous connecting tissue as well. Okay, so now we're going to go through the learning objectives for this second part. So we're going to compare bone and cartilage in terms of generalized function, cell types, organizational structure. We're going to discuss blood as a tissue, and identify and describe the different types of muscle tissue, and then compare characteristics of neurons and neuroglia in terms of nervous system function. Okay, with bones. Bones are uniquely hard and strong connective tissue type. So the mature cells of bone are called osteocytes. Anytime you see osteo, think of bone. Anytime you see cyte, think of cell. So osteocytes are bone cells. And they're embedded in a calcified matrix. They have calcium, it's calcified, it's hard. So the extracellular matrix is calcified. So that inorganic component of the matrix accounts for 65% of the total bone tissue. So bone tissue has bone cells that are encased in a calcified matrix. Extracellular matrix is hard, and it makes up most of the bone tissue. So bones provide support and protection for the body, and they serve as attachment points. So when you look at a skeletal system, so when you say skeletal system, you know that is organs coming together for a common goal. Well, bones are the organs of the skeletal system. So here are the functions. You definitely need to know the functions. Support, protection, point of attachment for muscles, a reservoir for minerals, and they support blood-forming tissue. Okay, I'm not going to go specifically in terms of the osteon. We look at compact bone tissue. They're made up of osteons, and it just shows a ossification of a skeleton. So this is a fetus that shows it starts as cartilage, and then the skeleton's beginning to develop into bone. Here's the type of bones. You have compact bone, which is very hard, and it forms most of the hard shell of the bone. And then you have the cancellous, which also is called spongy bone because it looks like a sponge. And that's where, in that area, is where we have red blood cell, white blood cell production, platelet production. That's the spongy bone. So no spongy bone, and then the shaft is made up of compact bone. And so this is more of a picture of the unit of bone, which is called the osteon, and it shows that the bone cells. This is it's a lacunae. It's a opening that has a bone cell in it, and the bone cells secrete substances that draw calcium to them, and that substance, the calcium, starts to ossify. And so the area around this gets hard. And as it gets hard, then, and this one gets hard, it makes this whole bone hard. Okay. Then it talks about the spongy bone. Just know that the cancellous is called the spongy bone because of sponge-like appearance. Okay. So it just has pictures of it. Now let's talk about the cartilage tissue. The chondrocytes, so whenever you see chondro, think of cartilage. And you see cyte, you think of cell. So cartilage cells, they're the only cell type present in cartilage tissue. So chondrocytes, these cells produce fibers and the ground substance of cartilage. So chondrocytes, like bone cells, are found in lacunae, or spaces. Cartilage is avascular. So nutrition of cells depends on diffusion of nutrients through the matrix. So in order for the cell to be nourished, the nourishment needs to go through the matrix. Then the perichondrium is a membrane that surrounds the cartilage. So if I ask the question, why does cartilage heal slowly after it's injured? It's because the nutrients need to transfer through the matrix. And so to get to the cell, and it is very slow to get to it. Okay, let's look at the different types of cartilage. I do want you to know the different types of cartilage. First, you have the hyaline cartilage. It's the most prevalent type of cartilage. And it's also located on the ends of articulating bones. These are bones that are in direct contact with each other. Okay, so I need you to know hyaline cartilage. And it's just a photomicrograph of hyaline cartilage. Then you have fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest and most durable type of cartilage. It's found in between the vertebrae. It's called intervertebral discs. And so its matrix in fibrocartilage is rigid and hard. It's filled with a dense packing of strong collagen fibers. So it also serves as a shock absorbing material between bones at the knee. So we have hyaline cartilage first. It's most abundant. It's on the ends of articulating bones. Then we have fibrocartilage, which is found in between the vertebrae and also in the material between the bones at the knee and the meniscus. Okay, so this is fibrocartilage, photomicrograph of fibrocartilage. And once again, this is the chondrocyte, and it's in a lacuna, which is like just a space. So you see how it has chondrocytes? Okay, the chondrocytes, they're spaced out. All the rest of this is matrix. And this matrix this is pretty hard, but it's not calcified. So it's not like bone, but it's very hard. Okay? So you have mostly made up of matrix, and you do have chondrocytes, or the cartilage cells, in it as well. Then you have elastic cartilage. So this elastic cartilage contains many fine elastic fibers. It provides strength and flexibility. And this type of cartilage is found in the external ear. It's also found in the voice box. Okay, so know where the different cartilages are found. Hyaline cartilage, you find it on the end of the articulating bones. Fibrocartilage, you find it in between the vertebrae and also in the meniscus. And then the elastic cartilage, you find in the external ear in the voice box. And this is the cells of the elastic cartilage. You see you have more chondrocytes or cartilage cells, and then you have elastic fibers in between. It makes it very, that's in the extracellular matrix. And so it makes it very flexible and it's very durable. Okay. So now let's talk about blood tissue. Remember what we say the definition of tissue is? It's like cells coming together to form, and cells coming together to do a common goal. And so with blood tissue, it's a liquid tissue. And remember, we said that when we looked at different tissues, its consistency depends on its extracellular matrix. Like with bone, its extracellular matrix is made up of calcified elements and fibers. And so it's hard. Well, the extracellular matrix around the blood cells is fluid. So it's a liquid tissue. And so it contains neither ground substance nor fibers. So that's the composition of the whole blood. It has the plasma and it has the blood cells. So the liquid portion of it, which is called the plasma, is 55% of the total blood volume. The formed elements, which are the blood cells, they make up the other 45% total blood volumes. So you have red blood cells, which are called erythrocytes, and you have white blood cells, which are called leukocytes, and then you have platelets, which are called thrombocytes. I want you to know the cells that are in blood, and that plasma makes up the majority of the whole blood, and it's liquid. Okay, here's a photomicrograph of human blood. And it shows 3 white blood cells, which are called leukocytes, and surrounded by numerous smaller red blood cells. All these, they're a little smaller, but these are red blood cells. And so they're called erythrocytes. You see that one, red blood cell. All these are red blood cells. And these 3 are white blood cells. And they're larger. You can see the nuclei. And then these little small fragments are actually thrombocytes or platelets. So the platelets. Okay? So that's a whole blood smear. So definitely know the functions of blood. Blood is used for transportation, regulation of body temperature, regulation of body pH, and white blood cells, they destroy bacteria. So, so some of the transportation functions include movement of respiratory gases. You know that as oxygen and carbon dioxide. And then it transports nutrients, transports waste products. All right. So let's talk about muscle tissue. With muscle tissue, table 9.5 in the textbook provides a summary of the muscle tissue types in the body. So skeletal muscle is, and know the three different types of muscle tissue and these basic characteristics. Skeletal muscle is striated and it's voluntary. Smooth is non-striated, involuntary. Cardiac is striated and involuntary. So know that skeletal muscle is voluntary and striated, smooth muscle is involuntary and non-striated, and cardiac is striated and involuntary. And also, you know, with cardiac, that means heart. So the heart is made up of cardiac tissue. That was skeletal muscle, showing the striations, smooth muscle. And location of smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is found in the walls of most internal hollow organs, like in the stomach, intestines, blood vessels. In the blood vessels, if you see, this is a cross-section of an artery. And so this is an artery. It is cross-section of artery. And so the lumen or opening of the artery, and this is the smooth muscles that make up the wall. Okay? And so it contracts or dilates to let blood in or out through this lumen. Controls the flow of blood through this vessel. So this is what controls the flow of blood through this vessel. And this is just a picture of a cardiac muscle. Okay, so you won't need to know the microscopic characteristics. And so now the nervous tissue. Definitely know the special characteristics of nervous tissue. So the nervous tissue, you have excitability, conductivity, and then the organs of the nervous tissue are the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves. Okay? So definitely know the special characteristics. Excitable, conductive, and the organs are the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. And then we have the cell types. So the nervous tissue, the cells of the nervous tissue are called neurons. That's the main conducting unit of the system. That's basically what you would call the nerve, is the neuron. Okay? Now it's made up of three parts. It's made up of cell body. It's also called soma. And then there's processes that come off of the cell body. The axon is usually a single process, and it transmits nerve impulses away from the cell body. Okay, so axon takes the impulse away from the cell body. The dendrite, and you can have one or more dendrites, they bring nerve impulses toward the cell body or toward the axon. Okay, so now the nerve, which is the basic unit of nervous tissue, the basic cell of nervous tissue, is the neuron. It's made up of cell body, axon, dendrites. So the cell body, and then you have the axon that takes nerve impulses away from the cell body. Dendrites bring nerve impulses toward the cell body. So that's the neuron, nerve cell. Then you also have neuroglia. These are special cells that just take care of the neurons. So they're smaller typically, and they surround the neurons and they take care of them. And so now this is the picture of nervous tissue. And so here you can see this is the cell body, and then here would be the axon coming off. And then these multiple things branching off would be the dendrites. So you have the nerve cell body, which is the soma. You have the axon, which takes impulses away from the cell body. You have dendrites that bring impulses to the cell body. And you can see here, this is cell body, this is the axon taking it away, and these are dendrites bringing it to the cell body. Here you can see pictures of the dendrites, and you can see an axon leaving this cell body. And all these little things that you see out here, these are the nuclei of the neuroglia. Remember we said the neuroglia, what do? They support and take care of the nerve cells. So they're typically smaller, but they take care of, they help make the nerve conduction faster. They protect it against, protect the nerve cells against foreign invaders. They help to nourish the nerve cells. But these are the neuroglia. Okay. And so I think that's it. Yep. And so look it over. I hope it helps, and make sure you read the chapter, and you should do well. All right. Talk to you soon.